going to invite Professor Lisa McNeill to talk about this. And Lisa is, as well as a really experienced IODP scientist, is presently one of the co-chairs of the IODP Science Evaluation Panel. And so I'll just pass over to Lisa. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so as Damon said, I'm one of the two co-chairs of the Science Evaluation Panel at the moment. So from that position, I'm going to hopefully tell you how an IDP proposal is evaluated and moves through the system. And you'll hear a bit more about that from Ustine, who will talk later about the site survey process, and Dave McEnroy is going to follow and say a little bit more specifically about MSP proposals. Okay, I do apologise in advance, there's quite a lot of text in these slides, so make the most of the occasional figures, this being one of them. Okay, so as Damon mentioned earlier, one of the really great things about the programme is that it really is sort of led from the sort of the bottom up, which always sounds bad, but basically it's driven by the scientific ideas from the community. And that's not just words, that really is true. And we as the science community are also those who are on all the panels that are doing the evaluation and the feedback and trying to get, you know, the best of those proposals finally drilled. So proposals are written and they are sent to the SEP. So we evaluate the science, but also look at the site survey aspects. So the details of the data that are imaging the site and the sites themselves in terms of, are they suitable for the drilling? And those two are combined. There used to be two separate panels looking at the science and the site information, and now they're combined. And that works pretty well. And then in addition, you also have to go to a panel that looks at the environmental and pollution and safety aspects as well. And then at that point, if we feel the proposal is good, it gets forwarded on to the appropriate facility board that will basically be responsible for scheduling and preparing the logistics and the operations. And we have 3 of those facility boards in the current programme, which is soon going to come to an end. So we have the Joint Resolution Facility Board, we have the EFB, ECORD Facility Board in charge of MSPs, which we'll hear more about, and then the CHICU board as well. And then hopefully, eventually your expedition will get scheduled. Okay, so that's kind of how the system works. IDP is really rich, that makes it sound like a positive thing, in acronyms. I'm not really a big fan of acronyms, but anyway, there are a lot of them, and so it's quite difficult to navigate sometimes. So there is quite a handy acronyms list on the IDP webpage, and we are talking about improving that as well, actually. But SEP is the Science Evaluation Panel that I just mentioned. That's the one that I'm the co-chair of. EPSP is the Environment Protection and Safety Panel. So that's the one looking at the environmental safety and pollution aspects. And they also give the final approval to the specific site locations and the depth to which you can drill. So it's actually quite important. And then FB is the facility board. So I'll try not to use acronyms too much, but if I do, those are the ones to keep an eye out for. But I would recommend making a link to the acronym site. So we have different types of proposal, and some of these are because of the nature of the project, and some of them are the different stages of your proposal as it goes through the system. So the main 2 stages are a pre-proposal and a full proposal. So the pre-proposal is a shortened version of the proposal. It still has to include your objectives, your links to the IDP science plan, outlining your scientific impact, hopefully globally, justifying the drilling, i.e. why is drilling the way to do this, and how you would go about accomplishing your objectives, so some outline of the methods, and ideally your proposed drilling sites. It's not so helpful if you have no sites suggested at all, but a minimal amount of information is required for the sites themselves. So we really strongly recommend taking this as the first step, not diving straight in with a full proposal, because it gives you sort of more chances to get feedback and to gradually sort of build up and improve your proposal. So the next step is the full proposal, and this is an expanded version of the pre-proposal. And it does, in addition to obviously expanding on all of your methods and your justifications and your objectives and your hypotheses to test by drilling, it has to also include all the complete site information, including details in forms and uploading your site data to site survey database online. And I'll come to in a moment the fact that there are a couple of stages to the full proposal and also now the pre-proposal. There are some other types of proposal. So there's a complementary project proposal. I think that's what it's still called. This is where there is a significant external funding contribution from a third party. So basically external support. And that often comes from governments, but it could come from industry. A second one that's slightly different is the multi-phase drilling project. And this is really where you've got a fairly complicated long-term drilling project broken into multiple phases, and this serves as an umbrella. And looking to the future with the new science framework, we're thinking about potentially new ways of doing this, because the flagship initiatives that Ros introduced could come into this sort of form, but we're talking about ways to make that happen within the proposal system. Another one that might be of interest is the ancillary project letter. And basically, this is this acronym APL, and this is a proposal to drill using only about sort of 6 to 9 days. So a small proportion of a typical 2-month expedition time, although your expedition could be different lengths, but typically they are often 2 months on the JOIDES resolution, for example. So this ends up being an add-on to an already scheduled expedition. So it's something that's geographically proximal. So an APL can be proposed for any location, but often what happens is they get proposed when an expedition has been scheduled or is about to be scheduled in a certain area, and people can think of an idea where they might drill 1 or maybe 2 short sites, and they've got a really good idea that could be achievable by doing this very sort of short amount of drilling. So that's something that's worth thinking about. And then I've also separated out here at the bottom land to sea proposals. So these were formerly known as amphibious proposals. And so these are joint proposals between ICDP and IDP. And in the past, they were very sort of separate in terms of having a separate proposal to ICDP and a separate proposal to IODP, but we've simplified that process and made it into a single proposal now. But I raise it specifically here because the offshore part of those is often near shore, and hence it's likely to involve a mission-specific platform. So land to sea proposals, as Jo was talking about with her example, often involve an MSP. So it's important to know about this process, and I'll say a bit more about it in a moment. In fact, even right now, I'll say a bit more about it. So as I said, we recently revamped the procedure for this, and you can find the full details of this in the proposal submission guidelines. And I've provided a direct link for that, but you can also find it on the proposal submission IODP webpage. These guidelines were updated last summer, so it's definitely always important to download the most recent version. So what we've done, as I said before, it was quite a complicated and painful process for proponents, which I think probably put quite a lot of people off. So we've tried to make it a much simpler process. So now there's a single proposal that goes to only one of these organisations, but we share it. So at each stage of the proposal, we have a combined group of members from IDP and ICDP that evaluate together and also feedback and discuss with their own panels. So we're giving joint feedback to this single proposal. The early stages of the proposal, the pre and the workshop proposal, go to ICDP and they share it with IODP, and the full proposal goes to IDP, and likewise that's shared with ICDP. Once you get to the point of reaching the point where we're going to sort of forward it on to the appropriate sort of facility boards for scheduling, at that point then those sort of operations are sort of handled separately, although also joined up as normal. But the whole kind of evaluation process is now simpler, one proposal, and hopefully that will give a much smoother process and hopefully quicker process for proponents. So we hope this encourages people to put together a proposal of this kind. So in general, for the IODP proposal progression, I said before, the main stages are a pre-proposal and a full proposal. You probably know that there are 2 deadlines for IODP every year in April and October. I've put up the kind of word lengths. I'm not going to go into details here, but again, it is notable that we revised these in the recent proposal submission guidelines last summer, and in your favour. So don't worry, we haven't given you less space. So always check the latest version. So the pre-proposal, the options are, it could progress onto a full proposal. We might decline it, and I'll explain why in a moment. We have a new situation where we can ask you for a revision of a pre-proposal. And then for a full proposal, you get 2 chances at the full proposal. So a full and a full 2. And after that point, we have to either send it to external review or decline. So this is part of the system that Damon was talking about, where we're trying to keep the system a bit more kind of agile and not have proposals that stay in the system for many, many, many years. If your proposal is declined, then of course you can always resubmit it, but we have made some changes in the system that means that we want you to show us what you've done that's changed when you come back. You can also end up being asked to do an addendum. This is where you might make some updates to new or changed sites, for example. As I said, the proposal goes out to external reviews. These are usually 4 or 5 reviewers. Will give their opinion on the proposal, and based on that and the SEP opinion, we then give a rating, and I'll come to what those ratings are in a minute, and then we move it on to the appropriate facility board, and then the next part is scheduling. So a few more links here. I'll say it for a 3rd time. Be sure to download and read carefully the most recent version of the guidelines. There's a link for those, and then the proposal submission information page is given there as well. And also something that's quite handy, we do very strongly encourage that you work and communicate with the appropriate operator. And if you're not sure which one it should be, ask us and we'll put you in touch with the right person or suggest the right person. So by talking to the operator, they can help you to come up with an estimate of your operational times, but you can also use a calculator online to come up with an estimate as well. But yes, I should make a big emphasis here on talking to the operator. And if we tell you in a review from SEP to talk to the operator, then you definitely should. Okay, just some of the changes that we made last summer. And I've covered a couple of them, but I'll mention a few more. So yes, we made some revisions to the word length, so double check those if you've worked on proposals before, but of course, always check the guidelines, the guidance for the formatting of your proposal. And we've changed the land to sea drilling proposal format, so hopefully that will help. With the mission specific platforms, which I seem to have made slightly Latin or Italian there, there's a new requirement to give 3 different scenarios, which I think Dave will probably hopefully talk about as well. So sort of A, B, C with your sort of full-blown proposed operations, and then 2 sort of slightly sort of cut down options of operations. And the operators will help you work on those, but this helps them then if they come to having to make those sorts of decisions, they've got those scenarios in front of them, and also those have been evaluated in terms of meeting the science objectives by the SEP panel as well. So I said that something about giving a response about changes you've made to your proposal. We've added a new box that you have to complete, which says how are you responding to the SEP review and what changes to the proposal have you made when you're submitting a revised proposal or a previously deactivated proposal. So this is very useful. We used this for the first time in the recent round of proposals. It helps us to see what you've done, and hopefully it makes you think about what you've done, and it avoids people just submitting the same proposal again once it's been deactivated, which occasionally happens. The word deactivate has been changed to decline. I won't go into details, and as I said before, there's now a revision of a pre-proposal, a pre-2. And in future, we've just been talking about potentially introducing a very short section that would be a sort of a layman's summary of the science and broader impacts. because we think that could be very useful for a number of different uses. Okay, so what actually happens in the panel, and what do we actually do? So we have sort of two responsibilities. The obvious one is that we're responsible for evaluating the proposals, selecting the best of those and the most relevant to the science plan for forwarding to the facility boards. And in addition, so on the bottom bullet point, we also advise the facility boards and the IODP forum that I didn't introduce, which is sort of an overall umbrella group, on any gaps in the proposal pool with respect to the science plan themes and challenges. So we and the forum chair are kind of keeping an eye on how we're doing relative to what we propose to do overall as a programme. And then hopefully we can make suggestions or encourage proposals in those areas that we're missing. So the SET panel has about 50 members. And as I said before, it's a combination of people with science expertise in lots of different areas and with specific site and site data expertise. And it's 2/3 science and 1/3 site at the moment. And then in addition, we also have representatives from the different platform operators, and they also act as a member of the small team that does the initial review and presentation of the proposal. So each proposal has 4 to 5 of these watchdogs, so SET members that present the proposal, and then the whole panel discusses and evaluates. And then we give feedback, and then the system continues. And our aim is to try and give clear and helpful feedback, constructive feedback to the proponents so that they can improve their proposal. And even if a proposal is going to be declined, we still give that feedback. So if you want to come back in the future with an improved proposal, you've got the feedback from us to be able to do that. I'm not going to go into details here, but there's lots of different sections to the proposal. And it might be useful to sort of have this slide to hand when you're preparing your proposals in the workshops here. You've got your cover information, which has got summaries of the project, an abstract basically, objectives and site details. You've got your proponent details with hopefully the appropriate range of expertise and experience. It's also good to have a good range of people from different countries, different levels of experience, and gender and diversity breadth as well. The main proposal covers your background, objectives, hypotheses, I should add, the impact of the results, justifying why drilling is the way to do it, your drilling plan, site details, methods. Again, an important method and analysis plan is key. Information about site survey data and anything new that you might need to collect, links to the science plan and other projects. For every primary site that you propose, you need to offer an alternate site. And that alternate site is something that would be able to still meet the same science objectives of the primary site, but it's in an alternative location where hopefully if there are operational difficulties with the primary site, then the alternate site offers a way to get around those. So it can't really be right next to the primary site because we'll have exactly the same problems there. And ideally, it might be somewhere where actually you would have fewer operational problems. So if things go wrong, it's a place where you can still hopefully achieve as much of the science as possible. You have to fill in details about the sites and the site forms, and then upload site survey data, if it's a full proposal, to the database. And you need to consider the different techniques. So you will have coring, you could have logging, you might have other downhole measurements, you might be thinking about observatories, you might be thinking about using other tools that are not within the system, although some of these obviously do have costs, so you need to remember that. And you need to consider issues that might be related to the location of your sites, so particularly things like weather, ice, permissions in territorial waters, currents, etc. But again, by working with the operator and talking to them, they can help you with this sort of thing. So that is a really crucial aspect, and we're kind of gradually with time making it more and more compulsory to talk to the operators. I'm not going to go into details about the site survey because Øystein has got a presentation later, so he'll cover the details. But it's a really important part of the proposal, and it's a key part of the evaluation at the SET panel. And it becomes continuingly and maybe more important when you get to the EPSP safety panel, and also for planning operations if scheduled and even when you're at sea. So it's an important part. There will be certain amounts of data and types of data that are required. They do vary a bit depending on the type of section that you're drilling and the environment. So do check the details for that. I made a point earlier, it's not always true that a crossing line is required, for example, so it depends on the site. So things to think about when you're planning a proposal are, what data do you have or is available already? And if that's not going to be enough, what do you need to collect? And then how are you going to go about that? So as I said, Uzdin will cover more about that in a moment. So here's the sort of typical steps that you would probably follow. So you would typically submit a pre-proposal first, and I would strongly recommend that you do that. It is possible to go straight in with a full proposal. And the reason why people might do that is, well, it's got a longer word limit. So you've got more space to elaborate on things. And you might do that if in the past, maybe you've been deactivated and you're now going to improve things and you know what you need to produce in a full proposal. But it is generally uncommon and not advised. There's one revision from full 1 to full 2. And as I mentioned before, there is also a pre-2 proposal. But basically, you only get one chance to revise your full proposal. And hopefully, by the time you get to that full 2, or maybe full 1, if you've done really well, you will go out to external review. Here I've put 3 to 4 reviews. Earlier I said 4 to 5. Let's say 3 to 5. More typically 4 to 5. So yes, at that point we would send it out to external review, and then based on those and the SEP reviews, and you also then as proponents have to write a response letter to those external reviews and to SEP, so respond to any of the points that have been brought up. We then decide whether to forward on the proposal and what rating to give it. And we give a rating of either fair, good, or excellent. And you really need to be getting a good or an excellent. Sometimes we can fast track some of these steps and do some things sort of out of the normal deadline order. Usually that's a function of sort of geography. So depending on where a particular platform might be, there might be a reason to move things forward more quickly. I put in, because Joe mentioned an example of a fairly sort of long-term proposal to expedition development process, and I'm going to talk about a similar one tomorrow, the Corinth Rift example. I thought I'd try and put in what's sort of a more recent kind of average time. I'm guessing a little bit here because I was trying to remember what had been calculated, but I think it's of the order of about 4 to 5 years now, something of that order. So it's not typical that you will be spending 10 years between first submission and an expedition being drilled. Of course, there are lots of variables for how long it takes. And this particular sort of number is aside from the current delays that we've got due to the pandemic. So on that sort of topic of scheduling, just a little bit more about how it works and therefore, what the controls are. So Dave will explain, I'm sure, about how that works for MSPs. And he'll tell you a little bit, hopefully, about the sort of the effects of the costs of the expedition and how that affects the scheduling, the number they can do per year, obtaining the appropriate platform are all sort of factors for MSP scheduling. So it's a little bit different to some of the other platforms. For the JR, what's been done in recent years is to develop a ship track that's not random geographically, but it follows a pathway. And that's been working really well in recent years. And I apologize for the blurry image, which I got from Clive Neal about half an hour ago. But this is a plan showing you the sort of proposed path of the JR in future, or sort of near future, up to about 2024 it goes to. So they plan geographically now, and that obviously affects the scheduling timing for your proposal. But it's worked really well in terms of minimizing excess transit and the related costs. So there's been a massive cost saving as a result of doing this. So you can see that for the JR, for example, it's currently working in the Atlantic. It's going to spend a number of years there. It's then going to move into the Pacific and then the Indian Ocean. So if you were now to put in a proposal in the Indian Ocean, which we are now asking people to do, because we have a lot of proposals in the Atlantic, you'll have to wait obviously until the ship is in the Indian Ocean. So geographic location is quite a key factor for scheduling for a JR expedition. Other recent factors, obviously the impacts of the pandemic are a factor for scheduling. And we also do have a very large number of Geordie's resolution proposals, both at the SET panel and also at the JR Facility Board. And that's why you might have noticed that for the coming up deadline in April, there will be no new proposals for the JR that can be submitted, because we really have a large number. And that's partly being driven by the pandemic delays, but also because we did get a lot of proposals in the last couple of years, which is great, but it means we're a bit overwhelmed as a system. So the proposal rating, the rating that the proposal gets, can have an impact on the timing of the scheduling, but otherwise it's usually a function of locational logistics, operations and costs. Okay, so I talked about the rating. Let's have a look at that. Sorry, this is going a little bit back and forth, but let's see what the sort of criteria are that we use for evaluation of proposals. This will be important for you in your thinking over the next few days. So, are the scientific questions or hypotheses being addressed exciting and of sufficiently wide interest to justify the requested resources? And they really do have to be globally relevant, those scientific questions. So I'll sort of mention that global significance again, but here that's got to be the case. And to what degree does the design of the site characterization and the operational plans for the drilling, coring, logging, other experiments constitute a compelling and feasible scientific proposal? So the feasibility there is really key. Justifying drilling, but also, can it be done? Will the proposal significantly advance one or more goals of the science plan? So showing that link. Having said that though, if a really good idea comes forward and it doesn't have a link to the science plan, because actually in the current science plan there are quite a few gaps, you may have a great idea, but you can't make an obvious link. And that doesn't mean that it'll stop us potentially scheduling an expedition. But we do want you to try and make links and show how it will help us to implement the goals of the science plan. And with the proposal, engage new communities or other science programs into the drilling program. So we're always trying to expand, get the most out of it, get more people involved, and grow the program. So these ratings of excellent, good and fair, an excellent proposal is very exciting. It's addressing new scientific problems, using novel approaches. It's of definite global significance. It's going to be of wide importance in terms of the results. It has great potential for some really true discoveries and new discoveries and breakthroughs. And it really should be drilled if at all possible. A good proposal has potential for producing exciting science. And compared to an excellent proposal, it might be sort of more focused on mature scientific problems, maybe with less potential for sort of new discoveries, but should be seriously considered for drilling. So I would say that most proposals that we rate are good or excellent. It's quite rare to have a fair. Usually we'll have declined the proposal before it gets to that point. So fair really isn't terribly exciting, not great potential for discovery. It might provide some useful data, but it's going to be a fairly low priority in terms of the very significant investment you would make to drill it. So what makes a proposal excellent? So strong and compelling science questions, hypotheses. I should really emphasize hypotheses. We really like to see how will drilling allow you to test your hypotheses. That's a really key part of the proposal. So I should delete questions and put hypotheses there. But strong science hypotheses of global importance. Innovative with great potential for success. So that's considering both the science and the operations, and responsive to our feedback. Because that helps to improve the proposal, not just because we only like it if people respond to our feedback. And what will cause a proposal to be declined? Science is incremental. It's more about a regional question rather than global significance. Proponent's not responsive, doesn't really consider alternative ideas and hypotheses, doesn't really have sufficient site survey data, and there's no plan to make that happen. And ocean drilling actually not the appropriate mechanism. That might seem an obvious one, but sometimes that's the case. So objectives cannot be tackled through drilling, and in fact they could be tackled through some other mechanism more cheaply. So just to finish up, I've got a few slides just about the Environmental Protection and Safety Panel. I won't say too much about it, and I think Damon's the resident expert, so sorry for stepping on your toes there, Damon. So EPSP, so this is a panel that all proposals will go to. Sometimes they'll go to EPSP during the SEP evaluation proposal, and sometimes it's after they've been forwarded to the facility board. So they examine every site that you propose, and that means all of them, primaries and alternates. The alternates are just as important as the primaries, in fact, because we need to know that they will be drillable if they have to be used. And so they're looking for any concerns over environmental effects. So they'll particularly be looking at every site for concerns about hydrocarbons and overpressure and any evidence of gas, shallow gas, for example. So for example, the JR doesn't have a blowout preventer, so this is a key safety aspect. And that would be true for mission-specific platforms also. So they're looking to see, is it the right place? So combined, so this is not the EPSP, SEP is looking for the right place to drill for the science. We're also going to look at any problems with the site that will affect recovery. And the EPSP will be more looking at hazards at the site, but the operators will also be thinking about that as well. The SEP will be thinking about predictions about lithology from the site survey data, and does that affect possible success? That's something that the site aspect of the panel looks at. Have you thought adequately about your time to depth conversion in your seismic data to estimate target depths and thus the drilling time? So that's something that we talk about and hope to see and give feedback on SEP, because ultimately the EPSP will give permission for drilling at a location, but also to a specific depth. So the EPSP, as I said before, there's sort of different timings. This is when you might go to EPSP. But they are basically providing advice to the facility boards and the operators, and ultimately it's up to them to approve the site locations and the depths, as I said before. So when you go to EPSP, you have to provide a report to them and you have to present to the panel in person, and they will ask a lot of questions, so one has to be prepared. They often request sites be moved slightly, and they do like to suggest or ask for more alternate sites to be added. So top tips for EPSP, and I'll sort of wrap up. So these are common mistakes, particularly with that sort of time to depth conversion. It's a good idea to include some uncertainty in your time to depth conversion in terms of the velocity uncertainty. And EPSP will sometimes also help with this by increasing the depth that you are requesting to drill to, so that you don't basically come up short when you're during the expedition and find you can't drill any deeper. So it's good to bear that in mind. And also to remember that logging tools, some of your logging tools are in a string. So the key one that you might be interested in might be at the top of the logging string, and it's not going to reach the bottom of the hole. So you need to allow space in the hole to actually collect the logging data of the particular key horizons that you're interested in. It's useful if you can to provide your seismic data in depth as well as time, but particularly to indicate your estimated depths and what they're based on, and to label all of the potential hazards and problems. So be honest and open, and that's true at SEP, but particularly at EPSP. And if you have any data about hydrocarbons in the area, definitely provide it. Any information that you have that will show that drilling will be safe, or obviously check that it won't be safe, and be honest about that as well. Okay, so just some final words. Just coming back to mission-specific platforms, as we move into a new programme, fingers crossed, there could be more opportunities for mission-specific platform proposals. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing this workshop, is to try and encourage more of those. And it could be important during a time when maybe we don't have a JR type vessel operating. So we're likely to have a gap where there isn't a JR, and therefore MSPs could hopefully sort of fill in some of that gap. And because we've got a simpler process for these land to sea proposals, we're hoping that that's going to encourage more MSP proposals in the nearshore environment. So we're hoping that that will encourage people who've been maybe put off in the past. And also we've got a situation where currently new JR proposals are on pause because we've got so many of them in the system. But proposals for MSPs and CHICU non-riser proposals are continuing and are encouraged. So hopefully this gives some good reasons for why now is a good time to write and submit an MSP proposal. Okay, I shall stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. It was very clear, I thought. Any questions?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't know. Hopefully Dave will be able to answer that for MSPs. I doubt it for an MSP because every MSP platform is different. And therefore, those kind of estimates for the JR become non-relevant. It is kind of a spreadsheet form, as you probably know, where you can input different drilling rates yourself. So you could kind of adapt that spreadsheet and come up with some estimates if you can get some sort of drilling rate estimates from the ESO for a particular mission specific platform. So I think you can adapt it, but yeah, that one is specifically for JR and it's got some sort of examples for particular kind of environments and the sort of rate of penetration that you might be able to achieve. But as with all of these things, I think that the key answer is talk to the operator. You know, they will also come up with a time estimate. And actually, the most straightforward method is to talk to them, they come up with an estimate and you incorporate that into your proposal. That's what I would recommend personally.
I'll just add to that. So that's a good question, Ross. So yeah, there isn't a coring calculator like there is for the JR. We have thought about producing one because you know, the coring rates for MSPs are a lot more uncertain and more difficult to predict, although we are gaining intelligence all the time about these rates, and I tried to give the latest that we know in those primer talk that I gave a couple of weeks ago. So I have been thinking about adapting the JR calculator. It's a very good calculator to have that's Excel based, and maybe there'd be a way to adapt that for me to include some more of the kind of coring rate variables for all the kind of different types of system that you use. I mean, obviously for wireline coring versus C4 drill coring versus mining style coring, you know, the rates are all different just with the technologies, never mind with the different methodologies that you might also encounter. So as Lisa says, I think that's the best answer at the moment. You know, approach the operator, come and talk to us, and we can go through the timings and the coring rates with the proponents to give you the best estimate. But I will look into producing something that you can download and enter your own figures to play around with, just to get a rough idea of times, because obviously the information I provided also didn't include things like trip times and logging times and things like that, which I know the JR calculator does include. So maybe we could be more comprehensive than just the tables of coring rates that I gave in the primer talks.
Just to follow up on that, and this might be really a question for Damon, that's very helpful, both of you. I'm just thinking about in terms of this exercise, because when we've done this in the past as an ECR workshop, we have asked the students, or the researchers to use the JR coring time estimator, so that the proposals that we received to our virtual SEP during the second day of the workshop were realistic, and we didn't have people proposing to drill 10 holes that all went 5 kilometers deep into the crust. Shall we ask people to just sort of use the JR timings just to get an idea of what might be realistic in a 2-month expedition for this exercise?
I actually think it would be no, because I don't think they're relevant. I think going back to the tables that Dave prepared and having some discussion with Dave during this meeting about what would be reasonable is probably the way to go. And I think it's also worth, you know, bearing in mind with mission specific platforms is that, you know, we're not necessarily rigidly, you know, stuck to a 2-month expedition. So there could be some flexibility. It is what you need to do the job, but clearly working out how long that would take does bring some realism to it.
Yeah, and with the framework moving forwards, things like flagship initiatives were never intended to be a single expedition anyway, so there is flexibility for.
Yeah, I mean, I would keep it flexible, you know, but clearly the more time you ask for, the more money you ask for, the better the science has to be, really. You know.
Yeah, I just wanted to check how realistic we were aiming for.
Yeah. I mean, this is about mission specific platform, so we should try and, you know, I don't think the JR calculator is relevant for these sorts of expeditions. it might be for some, but
I was going to add, I do think, Dave, kind of talking to each of the groups would be useful though, because I mean, from my own experience, there definitely are some limitations from the MSP perspective in terms of, you know, the depth that you can drill to, and, you know, how long that will take. And if there are some people who maybe have had some experiences on a JR expedition, they might find that it is quite different. So although on the one hand, yes, you want to be able to propose what you need to do, I do think it is useful that people know what the sort of like restrictions are. So I think Dave, if Dave could sort of visit each group at some point and just, once they're at that stage, you know, just fairly early on, you know, that's sort of a reality check on what's likely possible.
yeah, and I think that will also come out on the pre-proposal review. There'll be questions on that. I mean, you know, of course, there might be proposals, and I don't know if anyone's suggesting this, that could involve onshore, offshore, and multiple offshore approaches. Yeah. And in that case, you know, perhaps something like, you know, the JR calculation would be relevant, and, you know, some people might, I don't know if anyone is, but, you know, there is a possibility of thinking very imaginatively what a mission-specific platform is.